Restart. So the first chapter in these 3 chapters that we talked about was the effective and efficient use of power and how to use it to maximize the benefits in a channel environment. And that power is when it's used judiciously and when it is used for system-wide benefits, then that is its best use of power. This next chapter talks about relationships, and it's also going to come into 2 different sides of the discussion. One is on commitment and the other is on trust. And I find that very interesting in a given way. This article is up on As You Learn. You don't have to read it, but it's really a great article if you're ever wanting to get into marketing and understand the deep depth darkness that we live in, which is not that deep. Anyway, these 2 gentlemen, Morgan and Hunt, Shelby Hunt actually is the real genius in the group. Shelby Hunt has written marketing theory books since 1960, and he's still working to this day at Texas Tech. But this is one of those things when you talk about in journals, this is a seminal article. This is in the Journal of Marketing, 1994, I believe, I can't remember. And if you ever want to have a journal that makes you, and in other words, you never have to worry for the rest of your life, this is one certainly that was for Dr. Morgan. And what this is on the concept of commitment and trust. And what this article does is it steps through and it discusses the roots of commitment, the antecedents of commitment and trust, and how these blend together and how they're extremely important. One of the particular models here, if you look at modeling, by the way, these are what are known as constructs, all right? And a construct usually is something like a very esoteric kind of idea. And when you look at this and you see uncertainty, and if you see functional conflict, you're going to see that word next chapter. And you look at cooperation and you ask to yourself, how do they actually measure that stuff? Well, what they do is they actually have a series of standardized questions, and the questions, the way you answer them, yes or no, give you an idea of whether you have cooperation or whether you don't. And they test these particular questions over and over and over again with different data sets, and they come out with what's called the alpha coefficients, which states their reliability, which is extremely important. Sorry if I go on about this, but I want you to understand that these ideas are backed up by scientific work and scientific evidence. So when you look at opportunistic behavior, shared values, relationship benefits, they're actually very real things that we're measuring. And when we measure those things, we're also measuring trust, and we're looking at commitment as well. And so what these lines mean is that opportunistic behavior is negatively related to trust. In other words, the more opportunistic you are, the less you're trusted. The more communication that you have in a relationship, the greater trust that you have. The more you share the values, the greater trust that you have. And the greater trust that you have, the less uncertainty you have. The greater trust, the ability of having functional conflict. So what it means is that even if conflict is inevitable, it can still be found some way to make things better. And of course, commitment and trust all lead to one thing, and that is cooperation. And so this is the model that they built together. They did extensive testing on this particular model, and you can see where all the rival models, they actually created a different model to see if the regular or the first model worked. And I could break this down for you for the rest of the semester. And basically what it all comes down to is that most of these things found out that yes, it is true, all right, that commitment and trust lead to these things. So I'm kind of leading these in because this first chapter, we're going to talk about commitment, and the next chapter, the first section of this book is about commitment. The second section of the book is about trust, and this is where it came from. I also want to show you one more thing. And this is kind of a very interesting article. And this is about supply chain between Walmart and Procter & Gamble. And I was reading this just before the class, and I was thinking to myself, how far have we gone? So this article, it's kind of fascinating, talks about the success between Procter & Gamble and Walmart. And one of the fascinating things that it talks about is actually the relationship was pretty contentious at one time. It was adversarial, that it was basically in what we would call a transactional focus, which just basically meant, you give me what I need and, well, I'll pay you. And that's as far as it goes, instead of being transformational. The key to this, which is a funny story, is this one in 1985, where Sam Walton wanted to call P&G and tell them that they were the vendor of the year. So they went through the sales organization. Sam went to the corporate office. He was transferred 5 or 6 times, and he threw up his arms and said, forget it, choose another vendor. And at that point, it's also when P&G began to really rethink the way that they approach, because Sam finally eventually got in touch with him and said, you are the vendor of the year. I couldn't get in touch with you. And if I can't get in touch with you, how good a vendor are you? And so this is when conflict also leads to good. And so I'll talk more things about how it was going. At this point in 1985, Procter & Gamble had about a $365 million a year relationship with Walmart, which was pretty good. In 2018, that number was $10.5 billion. So they've done better. All right. So I just kind of wanted to just show you those two things and start off by just saying that, relationships in channels are not only important, but they're vital, they're necessary, and everything keys to the growth in finding some successful way to connect with each other, your partners up and down the street. All right. So let us move on, and we will start talking about channel relationships. So why do relationships matter? Channel management, or successful channel management, is about motivating and incentivizing interdependent yet independent organizations to maximize the common good. And this becomes even more challenging in an omni-channel environment, especially when you consider so much power on the omni-channel environment area. Successful channel relationships need to function as a single shared interest, as if you're both in business together. Now, let me also say that omni-channel environments are difficult in creating relationships because they deal with synergizing the channels. And there can be conflicting interests across the channels as well. And so let's just say the barriers are actually higher, not lower. And so how do we define commitment, which is important for the test? Commitment is when one organization wants the relationship to continue indefinitely. And that good organizations must be willing to sacrifice to maintain and grow. And what that means is that when we looked at that whole commitment trust theory, if you remember that opportunistic behavior, you have to have less of that in order for commitment and trust to grow. You have to be able to give up short-term profits, which is what South Central Bell should have done with me. Sometimes it means you don't pursue other opportunities. But you do what you can to keep the thing going. And so, why? All right. So once again, we're going to think of we're just going to think of this group, these right now, as upper and lower channels. All right. And we're going to think of them right now. We're going to keep the consumer out of the mix just for the moment. And we're going to ask ourselves, why do the upstream members want to continue a relationship? What's the big reasons? Well, the truth is that manufacturers got the big head. They think they can do it all right? They believe that they can do everything in-house, and that's generally how manufacturers start. It's part of their culture. We're going to be able to do everything. But the difficulty with that is that it prevents you from understanding, respecting, and even trusting the intermediaries below you to any degree. And the difficulty with that is that quite simply, there are things that downstream members can do better than you can. When you have an appreciation of your downstream members, you will seek relationships to motivate those downstream members. And if you can motivate your downstream members, they're more willing to represent your products better. They're willing to do more for you in their current markets. They're willing to take that brave step and go out and look for new markets. And they're more willing to come in, and they're more willing to accept new products for you to be able to sell. Steel Tools has one of the best relationships between manufacturers and retailers. Their independent dealer network is something like 16,000, and there's something like 9,000 independent dealerships that have nothing but Steel Tools. Steel, you're going to hear some of these things when we talk about what an upstream member will do. Steel Tools will pay for 30% of any renovations inside any retail store, even if only half of that has anything to do with Steel Tools. So just think about that. So you're going to renovate your front store for $50,000. Steel Tools will cut a check for $15,000 to help you out. Is that just not amazing when you think about it in space? You know, is there any reason why steel dealerships are so loyal to them? If you have that appreciation, you just have the ability of expanding far faster than you might think. Okay. Upstream members can coordinate their efforts with distributors more tightly. It'll enable it to reach end users better. And also, there is the danger that if they don't have a commitment, that distributors, and I'm talking about wholesalers, let's put those in there, all right? They may keep or withhold information that could be important from the manufacturers. Information may still be the most important thing that you share between chapters. And they're more willing to share that information if their suppliers depend on them more, all right? Finally, there's just one more thing. to have a great channel commitment is a great barrier of entry for other organizations. In other words, having a great relationship is better because remember, a channel is a hard thing to replicate. And if you have a strong commitment, an upstream partner has with the downstream, it's much easier for the downstream partner to be willing to share and continue in the relationship. Now, if I'm an upstream partner, why would John Walton want to go out of his way to appeal to Procter & Gamble? Because you want to be able to be assured of having a stable supply of products that are desired. Let's also say this, they talk about consolidation. And what called consolidation, if you think about it, is when manufacturers or upstream suppliers in one form or another start to merge and consolidate together. And so you saw that in the 2000 to 2010 era when Compaq and Hewlett-Packard merged together to become one organization. When that happens, when there are fewer manufacturers, what you have to have is the ability for those downstream members commit to the survivors to maintain that supply. In other words, this is the worst thing that happens when two organizations merge, somebody gets laid off. That's basically what happens. You don't need two series of suppliers, you just go with one usually. And if I have a strong commitment with both of those, then the prospects are hopeful that they'll stay with you as well. If I am a distributor in the middle there, I want to have a long-term relationship because once again, as I've talked about over and over, we want to differentiate ourselves from other distributors. Because if one distributor is like another, how do you choose? When there's no significant difference between distributors, when there's no significant difference between anything, how do you make a choice? If there's no significant difference between two items you want to buy, which one are you going to choose? Cheaper, exactly. So marketing in its essence is about how we differentiate, how we make ourselves unique and special in the consumer's mind. And channels is no different from any other aspect of marketing. As a matter of fact, in distributors and wholesalers, when we talk about wholesalers, service is the essence of wholesale. And it sounds silly if you think all they're doing is basically supplying goods to retailers. But the truth is they're sending a service. And so that's why it's important, okay? And then finally, which is the most reasonable reason for both downstream members and upstream members to pursue each other, is they want to have an enduring competitive advantage. They want to have one thing over their competition. And so there's a nifty little slide here that talks about the basics of it. You might want to use this as kind of a cheat sheet when you're looking at studying about what bringing strong relationships do. But realize is that strong relationships, as I say, the core of it basically comes down to two concepts. It's the commitment and it's the trust that the organizations have between each other. That's the most important thing of all. So just before I go on to this next slides, let me just, let's see. Is it here? No, it's here. Let's see. I can't remember. Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to show you just a little bit of here that Walmart and Procter & Gamble still collaborate, that come together with kind of an interactive experience on what is the way to educate your family how to conserve resources. And as I said, it's kind of a dual thing. And how they talk about, this is kind of another interesting article, is how they built basically a blended culture together, and that it's interdependence, and that they've really kind of cut the functional lines between each other and really found the connection together and created a long-lasting and successful kind of relationship. All right, so we start talking about commitment, and also it's what are the activities that build commitments, because you can feel commitment, but you have to act on commitment, all right? And so you first start with the belief that you want to build the expectation that you're going to be doing business with your partners for a long time, as long as they are in business. And given also this, there's also a protective reason why you want to do this as well. One of them is that even though you might have, high separation costs, the fact is that the legal boundaries to separate contracts in the United States is quite low, and that it's not that difficult at any time for organizations to release themselves of their commitment. Channel members know they'll be replaced if their performance fails to satisfy, but the failure of knowing whether or not you are failing comes down to the concept of a two-way communication. There needs to be some kind of communication between the partners involved. There needs to be some reputation for dealing fairly with each other as well. And the last is not minor to any extent. There needs to be combined stakes. And so what that means is that both sides win when you do it right, and both sides fail if you don't. And any organization that isn't afraid of losing is not an organization that's going to be fairly well committed to their partner. You have to take a risk, always. And so how do you do those? This is kind of just how do you know whether or not you're having a committed relationship? These are the things that you will see. You'll defend them if others criticize them. You expect to be doing business. You have a sense of loyalty. You're willing to make long-term investments and then wait for those payoffs to come. So, asymmetric relationships or commitment is rare. Each party must be willing to give its all. And if there's doubt, which there can be in any relationship, the doubt needs to be assuaged by actions, by things that both sides see. And so how do you go about, what are the actions that you go through? Well, these are some of the strategies that you do. The first thing that you look at is you ask yourself quite simply, do you have an acrimonious relationship? And do you anticipate the supplier tying themselves to your business? And so there are two forms of actions that you can take. One is selectivity, and the other is specialized investments. And so selectivity by the supplier says basically you are going to select that brand as the only one that you sell. It means that you forsake all others, such as steel. Suppliers might want to build assets that are dedicated to your particular relationship. And so in a steel distributorship, even if they have multiple different things, if they have Husqvarna or any of the others, the fact that there's a special section, nothing but steel tools, that would be an example that those things could not necessarily be redeployed in another way. Or let's say if there are a particular line of tools that only steel has that require special area, specialized training for your service people that only relates to steel. That would be another example. It's these unique, non-deployable kinds of investments that are strategies for building commitment because you know they're only going to be used in one location. So, what are some of these difficult to redeploy ones, other than the ones I said? As I said, personnel and facilities dedicated to a single distributor. And so you can even have specialized individuals in your organization that only focus on those particular products. You send your employees to them. They send employees to you. They learn about your methods, your people, your strength, your weaknesses, all of those things. It's very bearing of your soul. I mean, there's a lot to give up. You start to create reporting systems that are not specialized with your organization, but geared to the particularities of theirs. They need to identify your business as its business. And so steel distributorships, even if they have the name of a single individual who owns that organization is synonymous with steel tools. And then finally, investments in general training programs that help you run the businesses better. So distributors, they work out by having individuals in their organization that all they do is dedicate people and facilities to your lines. Now, as I've said before, Walmart and Procter & Gamble have taken this thing to the ultimate level. And the way that they've done it is they've actually put a Procter & Gamble's office inside of Walmart in Bentonville. And Walmart has an office inside of Procter & Gamble. I can't remember. I keep forgetting to look it up. So along with all of these other things that they do, they help to upgrade and train your personnel that's equal. You learn about you, build the relationships, you ally that name with yours in a customer's mind. And when I think of Walmart, Procter & Gamble is almost synonymous, even though both organizations are incredibly powerful. And finally, they locate their facilities near you and far from competitors. And I can say even having an office in somebody's place, that's a classic example as well. And so I've talked about these are in essence kind of self-repeating. You dedicate the resources to the supplier, dedicated personnel, you do joint marketing. Most cooperative advertising groups will pay anywhere from 80 to 90% of an approved advertising. So if you work in a retailing and you're like a steel distributorship and you do a photo approved advertisement on steel and just put your name in the bottom, steel will pay for 90% of that advertising anywhere it is. Usually you have to get prior approval, but I know some organizations that you don't, all right? So we're still seeing all the same things. It's a really kind of a bearing of your soul. It's a willingness to show your strengths and your weaknesses at the same time. But once again, all of those things lead to commitment. So you cannot or can create it. The thing also to know is you can create a close, committed relationship without creating a successful channel. All right. It doesn't ensure success. You need also to verify the downstream members, their ability to perform and their own individual motivations as well. This is especially true of branding manufacturers who are coming out with new products, who are looking for investments in dealerships in what they do, because very simply, many times, there are individuals who just, would be a distributor in name only, but not willing to put in the effort, all right? So that comes down to two-way communication. See the market, you can see where the distributor serves. All of those are things that are important. You break down those barriers so the upstream partner sees what the downstream members have going. I am screaming through this chapter. We have hit where I want to leave. Contain your disappointment. We will pick it up on Thursday and we'll be talking about commitment. Okay. All right. Thank you. Sure. Good day.